Hello and welcome back to our study on Mark chapter 3. We are just enjoying our nice gift from friends of the church, friends in the church, who gave us a great Easter egg. So we're gratefully receiving and eating that just now. So while we do that, we're going to read through the scripture. We're on Mark chapter 3, verse 1 to the end. So Mum's starting us.
Okay, verse 1. Again he entered the synagogue, and a man was there with a withered hand. And they watched Jesus to see whether he would heal him on the Sabbath, so that they might accuse him. And he said to the man with the withered hand, "Come here." And he said to them, "Is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to do harm, to save life or kill?" But they were silent. And he looked around at them with anger, grieved at their hardness of heart, and said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." He stretched it out, and his hand was restored. The Pharisees went out and immediately held counsel with the Herodians against him, how to destroy him. Jesus withdrew with his disciples to the sea, and a great crowd followed from Galilee and Judea, and Jerusalem, and Idumea, and from beyond the Jordan, and from around Tyre and Sidon. When the great crowd heard all that he was doing, they came to him.
And he told his disciples to have a boat ready for him because of the crowd, lest they crush him. For he had healed many, so that all who had diseases pressed around to touch him. And whenever the unclean spirits saw him, they fell down before him and cried out, "You are the Son of God." And he strictly ordered them not to make him known. And he went up on the mountain and called to him those whom he desired, and they came to him. And he appointed 12, whom he also named apostles, so they might be with him, and he might send them out to preach, and to have authority to cast out demons. He appointed the 12, Simon, to whom he gave the name Peter, James the son of Zebedee, and John the brother of James, to whom he gave the name Boanerges, that is, sons of thunder, Andrew and Philip and Bartholomew, and Matthew and Thomas, and James the son of Alphaeus, and Thaddeus, and Simon the Zealot, and Judas Iscariot, who betrayed him.
Then he went home, and the crowd gathered again, so that they could not even eat. And when his family heard it, they went out to seize him, for they were saying, "He is out of his mind." And the scribes who came down from Jerusalem were saying, "He is possessed by Beelzebul, and by the prince of demons he casts out the demons." And he called them to him and said to them in parables, "How can Satan cast out Satan? If a kingdom is divided against itself, that kingdom cannot stand. And if a house is divided against itself, that house will not be able to stand. And if Satan has risen up against himself and is divided, he cannot stand, but is coming to an end. But no one can enter a strong man's house and plunder his goods, unless he first binds the strong man. Then indeed he may plunder his house."
Truly I say to you, all sins will be forgiven the children of man, and whatever blasphemies they utter. But whatever blasphemies against the Holy Spirit never has forgiveness, but is guilty of an eternal sin. For they were saying, "He has an unclean spirit." And his mother and his brothers came, and standing outside they sent to him and called him. And a crowd was sitting around him, and they said to him, "Your mother and your brothers are outside seeking you." And he answered them, "Who are my mother and my brothers?" And looking about at those who sat around him, he said, "Here are my mother and my brothers. For whoever does the will of God, he is my brother and sister and mother."
Okay, so it says, the very first words is again. Again he entered the synagogue. This was God who was found always worshipping, wasn't he? That's kind of what he did. It was either very publicly or very privately when he'd go off by himself. He gathers a crowd, he gathers controversy, and I think that's often how you know it's true, isn't it? Because the people are trying everything they can to trip him up. So anyway, he enters the synagogue again. I guess it's on the back of when the Bible was written, we didn't have all these chapters and verses, did we? So I suppose we read there, so the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath. He's just had this conversation with these people, talking to them about the Sabbath. And now again, he enters the synagogue. If you imagine that there's not a break there, I think it seems like it just goes straight into that. Do you? And he meets someone in there in the synagogue. Possibly not, but he meets someone in the synagogue. What's going on with this guy that he meets in the synagogue?
He has a withered hand.
Well, is that significant in any way, or is it, I suppose we think again about how in those days people didn't have social security and things, so his life was probably quite hampered by this. Is that what we're thinking?
Yeah, physically disabled we would talk about today, wouldn't we?
I love someone has written that says that his hand doesn't work but his feet did, and the feet took him to the temple, and that's where he was found praising.
Yeah.
I really love that because I thought actually people have so many things to deal with in this life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I suppose, having said what I just said, in some ways the terminology now is differently abled, isn't it? It's, we recognise that though one part of the body wasn't working, that didn't make him any less of a person.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, I heard that he had I don't know if this is true, but it's what is called xeros. So that means like dry or withered hand, or maybe that's just a translation of the word, withered. But it's like dry or smaller. So if it's withered and it's dry and it's smaller, it's not really able to move, is it? So if Jesus says stretch out your hand, that's like almost as if he's mocking him. But we know
it's going to take a lot of faith, isn't it? It's going to, and we're going to talk about that now in a minute. Don't go ahead, Lydia. I never do that.
Terrible.
Yeah, I know. And I think genuinely, you talk about that, a small hand and things, it would have hampered a lot of what he was doing. And this verse 2, they. Who are they? Is it further down?
I think the context of the passage sort of shows that it was the crowd that were there, but I suppose our understanding of the mentality of the people leads us to think of the scribes, the Pharisees, the religious leaders.
Yeah, because we're going to see in a little while, aren't we, saying, not jumping ahead, but verse 6 talks about the Pharisees and the Herodians who didn't really link together, but now they are in their pursuit of how to get Jesus out of the way.
If your speculation is true, and this is all one bit, chapter 2 and chapter 3, then it does talk about the Pharisees in the end of chapter 2. So it could be the Pharisees.
So they're watching Jesus. What better thing could they be doing? Unfortunately, it's not for their edification, it's for his taking down, I don't know what the word would be, but
seeking his downfall.
To see whether he would heal them on the Sabbath. I think it is like they knew he was going to do that, didn't they? They know about Jesus, they know what he's capable of, but they didn't know Jesus.
I find it hilarious how they know what he is going to do because it's the right thing, it's the good thing, it's the perfect example of what God would have done. And yet them, thinking they were following God, wanted to catch him out doing that. And I'm like, he is the perfect example.
And why? What was the problem? Why did they not want him to do this?
Because they only cared about their law.
And their law was what?
That you couldn't do these sort of things on the Sabbath. There were certain things that you couldn't do, and that's all they cared about.
I saw it. Sabbath traditions was that you could when you cut your finger, you could not stop it bleeding, but you could put ointment on it. Right? So that meant that you could not make it better, but you could keep it from getting worse.
Right.
And isn't that just ridiculous again? Isn't it? Again, that man-made legalistic ruling. Because like Jesus has said in the previous passage, that the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. And it's about that. It's about, some of us could do a good dose of being a little bit more reverent on a Sunday or Sabbath or whatever, and some of us could do with taking down the legalistic approach. And actually it's about asking God, who do you want me to be? How do you want me to be? How can I most honour and glorify you on those days? If
this was the same day, then it's ironic really, isn't it? Having just had that incident out in the cornfield on their journey along, to then encounter this in the synagogue.
And it might not be, but
I suppose the thing is that if they were very bent on trying to catch him out on the Sabbath, and he turns to them and says, this is lawful because of this reason, David did this, then they sort of go, but he doesn't have an excuse for this one.
So verse 3 says, he says to the man with the withered hand, come here. That sounds like a lyric of a song. A country song. He said to the man with the withered hand. No? Okay, never mind. Maybe I shouldn't read this one. Anyway.
Cricket was going to get a mention.
You thought, oh, come here. Thank you. Setting that one up. So yeah, he says, come here. Really simple, 2 words. Come here.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that. I love, again, you've talked about this already, stretch out your hand. And there's that responsibility within the human life, isn't there, of where God will meet you at it. But he doesn't just say, that's it, I'm just going to let you do it all by yourselves. And that doesn't say I'm going to do it all for you. But he says, what almost feels impossible, try it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure that the guy, it doesn't say that he kind of went, oh no, I can't do that. It just says the man, he stretched it out and his hand was restored. It's very interesting too, there's a word in here that I'd never noticed before. In verse 5, can you guess what it is? Oh, that's the wall.
The word that hit me when I was reading it was anger.
Yes, tell me why.
Just that we see Jesus' heart against the religiosity and
Is that a word?
it is in our house.
Alright.
And the what's the other word we talked about in that setting? Legalistic. The legalism. He hates it. He's angry that their law keeping, rule keeping,
Will keep
is
somebody down.
preventing them from
Yeah.
doing good.
Yeah, and like I think the whole thing with anger in Jesus is that the common thing I think of is when he overturns the tables in the temple, and it's really the only time, in my view, if you'd asked me, well, the one time I saw Jesus in his righteous anger was this time. Do you know what I mean? And I was so surprised by this that I'd never seen it before and found it really interesting. And he was angry at the hardness of men's hearts, and it's okay to be angry sometimes at that.
Yeah.
To look around and think, wow.
I really like the fact though that anger is followed immediately by grieved, and the word grieved, it also can mean like to feel sorry for. So basically, he's felt so angry at them, and then immediately he's actually, I just feel sorry for you.
Yeah, and maybe that is the outcome of his anger. You know, for us, anger would almost bring a tit for tat kind of name calling, whatever, you know, retaliation, fury. But for him, it brings, oh, my heart is broken. You've made me that angry.
My course, one of our big things was to learn what is anger, and I had never thought about it before. I would really think that what is it, and anger, they talked about, shows what you care about. And when you're angry at something, it shows that you think this is not right. And it said that, you know, anger is totally biblical, it's totally godly. God gets angry at things that aren't right, but he uses that anger to make things right, whereas we use our anger selfishly in things that we feel aren't right against us, and then we lash out against other people.
Yeah, that's true. And actually, the anger that we should have should be against things like sex trafficking and, you know, paedophilia.
We should be angry.
We should, absolutely, and we should not only just be angry about it, but it should compel us to do something about them, as you say. It should grieve us. It should make us so angry that we're grieved and we think, I want to see something worked out here.
But we should also be angry at those who rank man's ideas about the Bible and about religion and about religious observance over the Bible itself.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely.
Because some doctrines and teachings, it's right to stand up for what we believe, but to take a form of belief and rank that higher than submission to the greater picture of the Bible, it makes Jesus angry.
I think it's, I actually don't remember what gospel it is, but one of the other gospels has this story in it and has a little bit more of what he says. Doesn't he say something along the lines of like, if one of your sheep fell into a pit on the Sabbath, would you not pull it out? And he's saying how much more of worth is this man? And it is ridiculous. If one of your sheep fell in a pit, they would take it out, but they weren't allowing him to save this guy's, basically saving his life.
Is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to do harm, to save life or to kill? But they were silent. You know, and again, that's the thing. Like, they've come with an accusatory tone. They've come with like this. You know, you've done this. This is wrong. and now actually when they're asked a question they're silent. I think that just shows again that Jesus is right here. So we've talked about this already, but he stretched out his hand. He asks the man to stretch out his hand. It's almost impossible for him to do, and his hand was restored. I'm guessing this was a hand that was like that from birth. So again, it's that amazing situation of the man through the roof. He's never been able to use those bones, he's never been able to use those muscles before, and now here they are, perfect. And how he's able to do that. And how we said already in verse 6, the Pharisees and Herodians are about to group up together, and and that's again what happens often, isn't it? Like that people will group up against what Christ has said to be able to take him down.
The enemy of my enemy.
Yeah. Yes. They become pretty much friends, don't they? Within enemy positions.
Yeah, can I just jump back? This
Oh,
is a
sure.
random thing
Yeah.
that I found it. So the word in verse 5, it says he looked around. It's actually, it means glance around. And I love the fact that, he didn't look around and go, oh, okay. He literally just went, I'm going to an enemy. And he didn't, let their words affect what he was going to do. And I think that's such a good example for us. We can look around, we can look and see what people are saying, but don't become too attached by what they're saying.
Absolutely.
Keep going on what
And it
you're
can
instructed
really
to.
derail you, can't it? When someone says or has an idea of what they think you should do, it can absolutely put you off doing what God says you should do. And that's a very good point.
This really shows how hard their hearts were though. Like even the fact that they saw this miracle happen and right after they go, right, you know what we need to do? We need to kill him.
Yeah.
Like how awful and hard a heart is that?
Yeah.
And it just, my heart would be grieved if I saw that. I really,
Yeah.
Jesus should be grieving at this
Yeah.
because they probably will not come back to his grace and back into the kingdom of their own free will, will they?
I think that teaches us that we should definitely be checking up on our own theology and ideas and everything all the time against the Bible.
Yeah.
We should be coming and we should never be so stuck in what we think is right that it stops us from actually fulfilling the gospel. They were not serving God anymore because they were so convinced that they were right. Whereas if they had gone to the Bible and gone, well, let's look at what he's saying and let's look at the Bible, then they could have actually seen, no, he's right.
Yeah. And even like you say, Lydia, seeing that happen in front of your eyes, there has to be a certain element of who is this man? And although I don't understand it and although I don't know exactly how I feel about it, I want to explore this. But instead of exploring it, they were willing to kill him so they never had to think about it again. And that's really important, isn't it? That we make sure that if God is speaking to us, that we don't try and kill that voice within us, but we listen. Okay, so a great crowd follows Jesus. So off he goes now. We talked already about how publicly he worships and now privately he withdraws with his disciples to the sea. I think he was a very good master and still is, isn't he? He realised that you had to come apart so that you wouldn't come apart. And that's probably a very good kind of way for us to work that out in our lives, isn't it?
Not that it worked out that way.
No, it didn't work out that way, but I think even knowing that, I've often said to Jonathan, can you just tell me I've got tomorrow off? And at the start he'd be like, no, but we haven't. And I was like, just tell me I do, and then I'll feel like I've got a day off and I'll be fine to do all the rest. And I feel like if there's that, maybe if they had the same sort of mentality as me, that they would think, do you know what, it's okay, I do have a rest day, and actually I can still, I get good sleep and everything's fine.
I think also he could see that the anger and the tension was rising with the Pharisees, and he realised that it's okay to withdraw.
Yeah.
It's okay to back away from an argument because, like you say, there was anger there.
Yeah.
And he wasn't going to go and batter them. He was going to say, okay, do you know what, we need some time apart, and that's okay as well.
Absolutely. So, I know this, Jonathan has brought in the map. So I feel like this might be the moment.
This is the
Is
moment.
this the moment where we're coming to? Okay, so a great crowd followed from Galilee.
We need the whole map,
and-
which is the whole point of having it.
Right, start pointing.
Okay.
Galilee
Galilee's here.
and Judea
Judea is down to the mainland.
and Jerusalem.
Up we go.
Jerusalem, is it?
There.
Yeah.
Okay, and some of the Idumea
Idumea, I would say.
Idumea,
That's sort
of
of
course
a
you
desert
would.
country to the south,
And from beyond the Jordan,
but this side,
and from Tyre and Sidon.
up here somewhere.
Tyre.
And then, there we go.
It's like somewhere else up there.
Sidon somewhere else. Wow, so it really
it's,
was.
it's north, south, east, west.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
That's a very good visual picture. Thank you for bringing the map, Jonathan.
even though his ministry was here, basically.
Yeah,
at this
yeah.
stage.
We
He's got people
actually
coming-
had someone phone in to tell us that
Oh.
from another gospel you can see that Jesus was actually living in Nazareth, or not Nazareth, in
Capernaum.
Capernaum at this point. Yeah, botched that one, didn't I?
Thank you, Uncle David. Yeah. Very good, that was very, very visual. Thank you, Jonathan. Glad I had to run up the stairs for the 4th time to catch that one. Yep. So, we've come from a big distance, and when the great crowd heard all that he was doing, they came to him. You don't blame them, do you? I've been part of that great crowd. So when I heard that was all happening. And I love this bit. He's got to get his bodyguards on. And we've got something.
I was just going to say
Yeah.
that when we hear of all these places, it shows that they weren't just Jews coming, there were Gentiles as well. And again, I think that is mentioned in one of the other Gospels. I'm not sure. I think I read somewhere that it has a prophecy from Isaiah
Okay.
saying that he will reach the Jews and the Gentiles.
Yeah.
And that was something that really important for Jesus was, that was the start. He
Yeah.
didn't turn away the Gentiles.
Yeah, lovely. So he's got his posse working on this and he told his disciples to have a boat ready for him because of the crowd lest they crush him. So I just think that mental picture is quite amazing and he was keeping safe. Like he had to die on the cross, he wasn't gonna die in a crush.
Oh my goodness. You got that one yourself.
I did, just there.
Well done.
Thank you.
I wondered, did he ask them to have this boat ready ahead of time, or was it just when the crowd started to push in?
Yeah. Was the motor running?
I don't think so.
No. Yeah, I don't know about that. And he told us to have a boat ready for him because of the crowd. I don't know whether he had it ready before or not, but
I really like the mental picture of this is not the point of the passage, but we should always be ready to serve Jesus.
yeah.
He said be ready, and that's what he's telling us.
Yeah. And then for he had healed many so that all who had diseases pressed around him to touch him, so his fame is widespread.
Yes. My one thing reading this is that people seem more concerned with being healed than hearing his teaching.
Absolutely, and we've talked about that before, haven't we? That he is more concerned with his teaching than the healing, and it's only a part of that, the healing.
And you can totally understand that. If you have cancer and you hear someone can heal your cancer, you are going to run up and you are going to try and touch that guy.
Yeah. But sometimes, for whatever reason, God doesn't heal the people that we're praying for. We've had that before where you prayed that God would preserve that life and it hasn't happened, or they haven't stopped going through the thing they're going through. And actually, we talk about this as well, where in the valley he restores my soul. We talked about that last night at our Bible study, didn't we? And I can think of a song that used to be, I think we used to sing it, but one of our ladies in church, she used to sing it probably before we did. And it says, in the valley, how's the chorus go, John? Do you remember? He leads me beside still waters, somewhere in the valley below. He draws me aside to be tested and tried. And in the valley he restores my soul. And that's it's got such good words, because in the valley he tests me and he tries me, but also in the valley he restores my soul. And sometimes that's what God has for us. He doesn't have us to get past the mountain, doesn't have to get through the mountain, we have to actually get over the mountain.
Yeah.
And he wants us to climb. But he comes into contact with a spiritual realm, doesn't he? In verse 11. What happens there?
What happens often with the unclean spirits, they recognise him and he doesn't want them to. He doesn't want them to proclaim.
Yeah. You are the Son of God, but he strictly orders them not to make him known. Because I wonder who they thought they were coming to, these people. They're coming to some kind of miracle worker, but did they not know it was the Messiah?
He probably thought he was another prophet or something, because I'm pretty sure some of the prophets have been able to do miraculous things at some point as well.
Yeah. You know, sorry.
a comment from our Facebook last week.
Yeah.
Carol was thinking about that phrase, the Son of Man, just linking it in here with the demons speaking about him as the Son of God.
Yeah.
And she mentions that she'd always thought of the title Son of Man pointing to Jesus' humanity. But when you read Daniel 7:13 to 14 in particular, it points more towards authority and universal dominion. It's the Son of Man, someone who approaches God himself in his heavenly throne room. And that gave her a different perspective, and I think
Shall I read that?
it helps us to see for ourselves just another aspect of who Jesus is.
We were talking about this last week, didn't we? I saw in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven there came one like a son of man, and he came into the Ancient of Days and was presented before him. And to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all peoples, nations and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom one that shall not be destroyed. I think these demons and unclean spirits, they wanted to control him, didn't they? They wanted to control the crowd and be like this, you know, they wanted to say who it was. And in doing so, it'd be like, well, you know, that's control that they had over him, and Jesus it wasn't even so much that he didn't want the people to know, he just didn't want them to have that control.
Right.
I feel a little bit. I wrote down and I've forgotten about it, like whenever these people are pressing in for the many diseases, and like when all that matters to you is what Jesus can do for you rather than who he is, those are the kind of people who don't stay following Jesus for long. Because they find out very quickly that Jesus doesn't take away all your problems, he doesn't give you all the money, he doesn't, there's actually a lot of...
It's often not what he can do for you, it's what he can do through you.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. Okay, so where are we at now? Next little bit, again, Mark is awesome because he kind of cuts it all up for me and I quite like that. Here we are, the 12 apostles. So he goes up to a mountain now. He's like me at the minute, I'm walking all over the place.
Jesus is healthy.
And he calls to him those whom he desired, and they came to him. He chooses the 12 here, doesn't he? What does that verse really mean? I suppose we could take it to mean anything we want it to mean, in a way. It could be all, what I mean is that we could point it in a way, you could say, oh, it means this, or it means that, or it means... But actually, it just means that he'd seen these 12 guys, he knew he wanted them to follow, he knew that they wanted to follow him, and they came to him.
It's like, you know, Jesus doesn't lead everyone to be the pastor of a church, but he led Dad.
Yeah.
And that means that he chose Dad for that role.
Yes.
And he chose somebody else to have the role of cleaning the church and doing that ministry. He chose someone else to be a Sunday school teacher.
Yeah, absolutely.
An apostle means sent out with authority, which I feel like is very basic knowledge, but it's just a nice thing to hear. They've been sent out, and when you hear from these Gospels of their backgrounds, and these men are not courageous men who are ready for anything. These men are fishermen and tax collectors and random people who are all put together to do the work of God and are trained from scratch, which is really cool.
You were talking earlier, Bethany, about it having the story somewhere else, and I forgot that I'd written it down, and it's in Luke chapter 6 and verse 12. It's Luke chapter 6 and verse 6 for that other withered hand story, but this bit, it says, in these days he went out to the mountain to pray, and all night he continued in prayer to God. And like, so it wasn't just like he went up there and said, oh, I'll just take this lot. He actually asked, look, Father, I've found these guys, and they the right ones. And when you think about that, he had Judas in mind, and he prays about that, and he knew how the outcome, and yet he still allowed that all to, it was all going to kind of come to be in the right way. They become disciples, don't they?
I was going to say, apparently the word appointed literally means made, and a lot of people have been really confused by that, because he made the 12 apostles or whatever. What does that mean? But someone really summed it up really nicely in saying, God literally created everything, he made everything, But what he's doing here is he's making a new thing. He is
Mm.
making the role of disciples and apostles.
Yeah.
And that hadn't been a thing before. You know,
Yeah.
you'd only ever learned and learned and learned and learned and learned and learned and
And
just followed.
That's a student, isn't it? When you're
Yeah.
learning as a student, but when there's personal attachment and you become like that person
Mhm.
as a disciple.
Yeah, and then what I was going to say is he's not just teaching them, he wants to send them out to preach.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what an apostle is, and that's what he was saying right now. You have a new role. You
Mm.
don't just learn and memorize the Old Testament, you're going to make the New Testament.
Yeah, so good. Yeah, and disciple means to be with. So these disciples were being with Jesus.
Mhm.
They were spending that time and getting to know and having that personal attachment, as
Yeah.
we said. And they were given power, weren't they? What were they going to be given power over?
Cast out demons.
And that seems to be a massive part of his ministry at this time. Do you think is that a massive part of ministry today? Do you think it's something that we don't look at so often? Is it something? I know it's a bit controversial.
I think certainly in countries perhaps that don't have the same access to the Word of God, we might see this more
Yeah.
in evidence.
It's interesting, isn't it? Like to look into that. But good. And these guys were going to have some amount of fame, weren't they, around the place? But really, their earthly fame meant very little, really.
It talks about the 12, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Because that was a known group by the time this gospel was being
Yeah.
written.
Yeah. And in Revelation 21 and verse 14, it talks about, and the wall of the city had 12 foundations, and on them were the 12 names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb. So right now, they weren't going to get, they were going to be known, but there wasn't going to be, it was going to be a fleeting fame, and really the heavenly fame, the eternal fame was what was going to really matter.
12 seems like a big number for, at least, like the foundations are often 12, like there's like the 12 tribes of Israel, and that's the foundations of Israel. And then there's the 12 apostles, and I think you have other 12.
They kind of all come like in twos though, don't they? Like, he appointed 12, Simon, to whom he gave the name Peter, James the son of Zebedee, John the brother of James, and his son Andrew and Philip, Bartholomew, Matthew and Thomas. And, so that it maybe doesn't come so much in twos, but you know that there's going to be just twos, aren't there? I read as well that Judas Iscariot, his last name would have been from a place called Kerioth, which meant that he was the only Judean in the group. And don't know if that's any way significance, but don't trust anybody from Judea, that's what I say.
I think if you read the different gospel accounts, you come up with different lists, but I think just like we encountered, was it last week we talked about Levi, and recognising, that's Matthew.
Yeah.
People had different names according to different languages
Yeah,
that were
yeah.
used at that stage.
The one thing in common with all four of them is that Judas comes last in every single one. And I think that's just like, would you like, all of them are getting, Simon and his name got changed, and this guy was this guy's son. Judas, he's the one that portrayed Jesus.
Yeah.
I see that Jesus changed Simon's name to Peter. He gave these other guys a surname, effectively. Boanerges. And he
Boanerges, what does that mean again?
Sons of Thunder.
Sons of Thunder, that's right. So we were saying earlier that that's Mark's little kind of nod to the fact that he's talking to the Gentiles, because they wouldn't have understood what that meant. So he was saying these guys came from a chap with quite a temper.
he was giving them an identity, in some cases actually literally changing their name.
But yeah, I love how Mum said, Jesus chose Judas. And no matter what road Judas chose, he was allowed to be in Jesus' presence, and he was chosen to be part of his club. As we were saying earlier, he's brought into this club. And we often see people who come into different kids clubs and things that are maybe a bit rebellious, and we let them come in, and sometimes they're changed and sometimes they're not, and sometimes they're a bit like Judas, where they get the chance but they don't take it. But it's just nice to know that Jesus accepts everyone.
Nice.
Yeah, there's great debate over whether Judas was a true follower at some stage,
mhm.
and that he was led away, or exactly what went on.
Yeah. Okay, so we have been just looking at the apostles, and so Judas Iscariot who betrayed him. So in verse 20, he goes home, and the crowd gathers again so that he can't eat. So many. And then when his family heard it, they went out to seize him, for they were saying he's out of his mind. Anything to say about that?
It's kind of a verse on its own, isn't it? I mean, we've got Jesus' mother and brothers later on, but this is just a statement.
Yeah.
Do you not think though that this is them, like they went out to seize him, and then this is them coming? So it's like telling you this happened. They decided they were going to do it,
Yeah.
and then they came and did it. I was looking at this and I was like, I can't decide if this is awful of them to not believe him, or if it's also just kind of a concerned family, because he's probably not looking after himself great, because
Yeah.
he's just serving people all the time, and so there probably is just a little bit of concerned family going, maybe we should just take him for a little while.
Yeah, I think we're very sure that the brothers didn't believe in him as to who he was until after he had gone again. So they probably see it their job to kind of protect him, them, the mother, from this guy who doesn't seem to know how to protect himself. I wonder what they thought about that after they come to realise that Jesus is who he said he was. But yeah, you're right, it's just, whoa, didn't see that coming, so that verse is out of nowhere. So then we move on to the blasphemy against the Holy Spirit, from verse 22 there. And the scribes that had come from Jerusalem were saying, pretty much the same as his brothers were saying, really.
Yeah.
Yeah,
A
Beelzebub.
little bit more drastic, wasn't it? Like the family are saying he's out of his mind. Like that's kind of saying he's sick.
Yeah,
The other guys are saying he's possessed by the devil.
Yeah. But again, that's how it's translated here. We don't really know what was said,
this is
but
true.
yeah, absolutely. There's a little bit of a parable then that Jesus speaks to, to them, isn't there? I mean, like, that's always a good thing.
Yeah, I think he calls logic into the equation, doesn't he?
I love how he answers them with a question, because that's what he does often. He did it before, like, you know, how can we not like help this man? I don't remember the exact words he said. On the Sabbath, and it's sort of like he just says to them, answer this question and really think about it, and you'll have your answer.
Yeah, absolutely.
This blasphemy didn't just discredit Jesus, it actually credited the darker side, Satan, which is so tremendously bad.
And powerful.
Yeah.
Tremendously powerful as well, isn't it? Like, it's not all powerful like Christ, but it's powerful.
I think that's what she's saying, is the accusation gave them power,
Yeah.
which is
Yeah.
that's bad, the accusation
Yeah.
itself.
Yeah.
Okay, so where are we now? So do you want to say anything about the parable?
It's very true, isn't it? It's like, how can this person be damaging themselves? If they were to do that, they wouldn't be doing very well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why would Satan make somebody's life miserable and then make it great? What's the point in saving someone and losing someone and saving them again?
Yeah.
Doesn't.
So verse 27 talks about no one can enter a strong man's house and plunder his goods unless he first binds the strong man. I think we very much take that as binding. Like what can be bound in heaven can be bound on earth, and you know that verse where we can actually pray that Satan's plans are thwarted, and actually it's almost like, you know, because God has control. We can't thwart Satan's plans really, but God can. So we need to like make sure we pray that and not let Satan have his way in our lives, in our families' lives, in our kingdom, as it were, in the part of the kingdom that God has given to us.
There's a lot in that statement. Never really studied it.
Yeah. Yes. And then of course you can plunder the house. So that's what we want to do. We want to plunder Satan's house and take back the people that he has in his list for, you know, going towards, you know, going away from God. We want to see them brought to Jesus. Then it says, all sins will be forgiven the children of man, and whatever blasphemies they utter. But whoever blasphemes against the Holy Spirit never has forgiveness, but is guilty of eternal sin. So this is the unpardonable sin that we speak of, isn't it?
I've often thought of the unpardonable sin as being the sin of rejecting Jesus' salvation. But I think in the context here, they're saying
Blasphemy.
blasphemous statements against the Spirit of Jesus, which is the Holy Spirit. Because, verse 34, they said he has an unclean spirit. Because they said that was what caused him to state, whoever blasphemes the Holy Spirit never has forgiveness. I think that is something we have to be concerned and careful about.
We have a little lodger just now, and he's making a little bit of noise. If you hear it, it's not anything other than his happy sounds that you might be. He's praising, he's agreeing with what we're saying. Well, now he's not so happy. Okay, so just this last little bit then before we get too unhappy. Jesus' mother and brothers.
Yeah.
So his mother and brothers come, stand outside, and sent him and called him. And a crowd was sitting around him, and they said to him, your mother and your brothers are outside seeking you. And what does Jesus respond?
He says, who are they? Like, who are my brothers and brothers? And
That's so
actually,
harsh, doesn't
the
it?
first time I read this, I was so confused. I was like, what does this mean? But then I kind of got from back here, they didn't believe in him, you know? And so he's saying, they've disowned me, basically. They've disowned me as who I really am. And so I don't have to
I
do
didn't
this.
see it as that, but not saying that you're wrong. More I see him saying, do you know what, anyone that follows the kingdom are my family. But there might be an equal part, an equal measure of that. But his mother didn't disown him, did she? She was the first one to set him up at the, for his miracles. She was like, listen, and he's saying, I'm not ready. And she's like, whenever he tells you to do something, listen to him.
Yes.
I think it's a bit of both, isn't it?
Yeah.
He's really saying, he's not saying like I disown them. He's saying like, if they believe in me, then they're my family.
Yeah.
And if you believe in me, you're my family.
And I think that's the way of God as well, isn't it, in Jesus? And it is like everyone's on an equal footing. Exactly. Not because you have been an apostle and a disciple and you've walked with Jesus, do you get a better place in heaven, or or you're more thought of or whatever. What it is that like He loves us. I mean, we're His. He loves you.
It's not really significant whether you're born into this earthly family.
Yes.
What is really significant is if you are born into the heavenly spiritual family.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Whoever does the will of God is my brother, my sister.
Yes. Yeah. So that's basically what we want to do, isn't it? The will of God. We were saying yesterday, there's no safer place to be than in the will of God. There's no better place to be. We can seek the will of God. He will show us and lead us and guide us. But at the end of the day, the most important part of all of this is that we're in His family, not the earthly genealogy family, in the heavenly. And all those things, those scary things of the unclean spirits and all the devils and demons are frightening and are true and real. But He has control. And He is able to do so much, isn't there? So much that we can learn from Him. Go take time away, speak to God, spend the night in prayer, really. Make sure you're making the right decisions. And if Jesus had to do that, how much more must we do that? So there we go. I think we have gone through that a bit. And there is much more, as Jonathan says. He hasn't even researched some of that. So there's a lot more that you could bring out of it and you could help us with. And next week should be amazing because John's just done a sermon on the parable of the sower. So he should know everything that there is to know.
There should be loads of comments flying in.
Well,
Ahead of
you should
time.
all know. Exactly. So next week is a big long chapter. And hopefully we'll get it all done during nap time next time. But it didn't quite work out that way. And so I think we better go and make sure that everything is sorted out for the rest of the evening. Thanks for joining with us. Thanks for coming alongside us. We really enjoy this, don't we, everybody, to kind of get a little bit more our teeth into the chapters. Again, we have so much to learn, so if you have something to help us with, then please write down in the comments. And we'll see you next week. Alright, take care. Bye.
Bye.